So, hello everybody, thank you Nomeda and Gediminas, and thanks to all the Swan team for an amazing week and to all the participants for some groundbreaking talks. It's a bit of it's always the luxury and the curse of speaking late in the week is that, everything seems to have been said, but also there's so much to connect between the talks. So. But this is not a lecture, it's more a project talk. I will introduce you to the works I brought with me and maybe to generally the practice I've been busy with in the past few years. So my name is Pausz. I'm designer and professor at the Iceland Academy of the Arts in Reykjavik. And I have my practice, and then I'm running a master program which is called MA Design, Explorations and Translations. Crazy title. I'm gonna explain a bit the title and the subtitle in a second. Just also wanted to welcome you with this guy. So, when you see this one, you have to ingest the plant. Those of you who haven't eaten it, okay? There will be some breaks in my talk, which I'll make as fast as possible, and then when you see this guy, you eat the plants. But okay, maybe I'll do it version speedy, hallucinating, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to start with a quote to contextualize the project and my practice in general from a philosopher called Michael Marder. In a text called The Space of Plants, Spatiality, Movement and Growth, and the quote is, "We are in a place, and here in this place human beings hope not only to learn something about plants, but also to learn from them and perhaps even with them." So I guess for me this is an important quote because as a designer I come from transforming material generally and taking resources to transform them into useful things. So I work a lot with food, obviously. I'm very busy researching food systems and the place of designer in food systems. Not talking about food design, I'm talking about how food is produced, where it comes from, the politics of the soil, the politics of exchange. And then recently, or this year, and in the next few years, I'm working more specifically on plants. In collaboration with scientists and also other types of knowledges. So I'm also interested in stories which are not told by science. Just a few references books I'm working with. This quite precise book called What a Plant Knows from Daniel Chamovitz. It's a pretty nice sort of vulgarization book about research on plant sensing. Those of you who know The Secret Life of Plants, that was like this very 70s series. This is a sort of reassessment of that today, and in a more sort of contemporary light. And then more like this is more for like the biologist, and so this fortress plant. It's really nice. It's a biologist friend of mine gave it to me. This is about chemical ecology, and it's about how plants and insects basically build their own sort of defense system to not be eaten by other or get pests, basically. How to survive when everything wants to eat you is the subtitle. So that's the scientific and sort of theoretical background, but I'm also very interested and increasingly interested in the more sort of the folklore and this sort of different, knowledge production, which comes more from maybe rituals and sort of spoken culture. So I'm just showing you one book which is called The Folklore of Plants, and if you look at the title of the chapters, we start with plant life, and then gradually we go into questions which maybe are not so often spoken about, even today in the field of looking at ecology, like plant worship, witchcrafts, which is a very interesting form of knowledge. There are actually, especially in France, quite a lot of practices around these areas I'm going to talk about, which are the salt marshes, sort of specific kind of witchcraft practices from there. So I'm just to explain to you the different types of things which I brought with me. So on the table there are models which we built with one of my MA students, Valerio, who's not here today, which are revolving around one particular plant. You might have seen it yesterday in the swamp. So it's called Salicornia europaea, and so we tackle this plant by using different methods. One is looking at its morphology and its geological, like the umwelt of the plant, if you like, and try to modelize this in 3 dimensions by making models. And then I also worked with also an ex-student of mine who's with the same sort of research that we had. We communicated through her sending me drawings or her interpretations of the facts that we found. Okay, so you have this approach and this approach, and the tension between the two for me is interesting at the moment. So, and I let you do some of the drawings on the table. You can see further the different types of approaches. Yeah, and please ask questions, anytime. But I'm going to try to finish around 1:30. Is that good? Gediminas? Yeah? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so then just a quick, more to contextualize this in my practice. So I am busy with working around plants. I did a project on dandelions. I think this project I want to show because it's the first time where this tension between the sort of use of a plant and the sort of life of the plant itself became quite interesting to me. As in not only making dandelion wine and dandelion salad and everything that you can, but also try to understand the movement of the plant itself. So then there's another project which is coming up actually in September, which is about invasive species, and that's quite a current topic, and I guess it connects it to the swamp in the sense that there is this maybe overarching concept of black nature. I don't know if that's something that exists outside of Iceland. Has anyone heard about this? Svart natura, so I don't know if it's dark nature or black nature. But anyway, in Iceland, it's basically all the zones which are part of the environment and which, until recent years anyway, were not deemed, worthy of being preserved or even studied, or were a bit abandoned. So we have also wetlands in Iceland, which were drained. The farmers were paid by the kilometer to dig trenches to drain the wetlands. So if you go to the countryside, it's absolutely amazing. There's a maze of basically just like holes, and of course it created huge impact on the environment. But so this idea of svart natura, black nature, dark nature, I think it covers swamps, but it covers also invasive species, which is becoming a huge area of research. And I'm working on a project for the next Istanbul Biennale, which is called Species Without Spaces, where we're trying to basically gather current visions and opinion on invasive species and be quite critical about the term itself. So yeah, that's another thing I'm busy with. And the last thing I will mention is a project which is called Non-Flowers for a Hoverfly, and it's about basically making flowers for this insect called the hoverfly, because it's a pollinator, and it could be useful to be able to seduce this pollinator into helping us to pollinate in greenhouses. So I'm working with scientists, and we're working from the insect perspective, basically. So they're doing that, and then I interpret it through design methods. So we're basically doing the flowers. And essentially, I just want to show that slide because it's really thought-provoking. So they make this. This is a VR setup for insects. On the top, you can see this little black dot there is a fly or a hoverfly. And so it's in India, this biological center. They're building a virtual world for the flies and trying to place different things to understand what attracts them. So I'm not part of the VR team, but I'm making the objects that might be implemented in that world to see if they attract them or not. If you want more, just come and get some. Okay, and then now the plant itself. Salicornia europaea. That was just the introduction. Actually, I think my first encounter with it was in a dream a long time ago, and the dream was I was in a really dry place, like a desert, and then there was like a plant growing on my head. But it was a pretty nice dream, and then I sort of forgot about it for many years until I found this plant in actually the fish shop in Berlin, because you can buy it in some fishmongers have it in different places. And so I was really happy to see it in reality, and I started to research it. And I'm going to show you just a few slides about the world of the plant, the Umwelt of the plants. Basically, salt marshes, or like intertidal zone in between the sea and the land. And so it basically colonizes this sort of very beginning of the land. Not only colonizes, I will show later, that also basically builds land. Yeah, this one is interesting also with the human figure in there. So these are, just to give you a little context of where this Salicornia europaea thrives. It's from a book, an archive book about coastal salt marshes in the Bay Area. Okay, and then the other reason I decided to present you this plant and to work on it is that I found out that one of the use of Salicornia is that if you burn it, you get a really good potassium-rich like soda ash, which is one of the components to make soap and to make glass. And so if you follow the geography where this plant existed, which is on these coastal areas, but also in wetlands, it just so happens that the glass sort of industry, the early glass industry, was basically around these areas. And the reason for that is that for a long time it was the component that entered in the creation of early glass. And so in our research we found that in Murano they also were importing basically the soda ash until they found out that they could make it themselves with local Salicornia. And this basically really pushed the industry to become a sort of much more powerful player in the glass industry. And the same phenomenon happens in the east of France. If you look at the crystal factories in the east of France, and at the time the workshops were just moving where the plants were. So you would go to a place, just burn the hell out of all the Salicornia, make glass, and then move to the next place. So yeah, it was a super interesting connection. And of course, time allowing, I would love to go to Murano and just make my own glass from samphire, maybe next time. You can eat if you like. Okay, so I was showing this intertidal and liminal sort of Umwelt of the plant in between the sea and the land. So I chose this two term, and I'm trying to draw some, in very big brush strokes, like some parallels between ecology and maybe more sort of the human translation of what we learn with plants. So this intertidal is, clearly a geographical notion. In between sea and land, this sort of area. This is in Iceland, so I did a lot of walks in this area. This is another idea for the workshop, to walk along the shore. And so, yeah, shorelines move, of course, depending on different factors. Not only the samphire that builds its own land there, but also they are the most at risk, basically, currently with climate change, with erosion, with pollution. So basically these liminal areas are, and also talking about the human aspects of, shores moving, as we heard yesterday. So I think these zones are quite interesting to focus on. And this plant is basically the archaic prototype of amphibian inhabitant of intertidal zone. And then I'm just, going very quick. I'm just thinking about this idea of this idea of liminality, and like limens, which are like the limits and the points of contact. And if you look at some marshes, you have basically this phenomenon where what's happening is not that you're erasing limits. I think today there's a lot of talks about, erasing limits between disciplines and between things, and I think limits are quite interesting as points of exchange. So, and I think in marshes, for example, biologically, they are the liminal zones, or the intertidal zones, are where the most variety of life and different types of bacteria exist. So, cyanobacteria and diatoms, these zones are where there is the most exchange and the most sort of vitality. So, just the thoughts. There you go. This is we're getting there, the oldest drawing of the Salicornia europaea. So that's from 1554. You want to take a pic? Yeah.
Yes.
It's a nice drawing. I'm super interested actually in also botanical drawing. So I just took this whole part out of the presentation for your sake. But I just want to mention there is this one woman entomologist and botanist called Maria Sibylla Merian. She's quite famous. I mean, her work has become more like artworks. And I like this drawing. It's interesting and cool, but it's also very, very sort of traditional in the sense that it represents, the species in its sort of, erect in its full bloom, and the debate that maybe we've been having about, can you isolate a species from its world and things like that. So Maria Sibylla Merian, if you look at her work, she was the first person to never represent the species on its own. So if she would represent Salicornia, she would probably draw also all the bacteria that are on the roots, and maybe the insects that live around, and the water and the sand, and so just to mention, quite interesting how we represent plants. So the morphology of it is it's called a halophyte, which is only 2% of all the plants on Earth, and it just means that it can grow with salt water. So we've been in our models trying to also get to grips with this tubular sort of architecture, and I found out that basically archaic plants, if you think about it, or if you read about it like this, before they were seaweed. So when you're a seaweed, you don't need to have any structure. You just in your elements of nutrition, it's coming from everywhere. The water is all around you, so you can be like a flat, happy seaweed just floating around. But then as soon as you need to get on land, then you need to channel water up and to channel light down. So this is why a lot of the sort of archaic plants are like tubes, because they just basically are carriers of stuff to allow them to live. And this echoes some conversations we had at the beginning with Gediminas and other people about this tubular architecture, and so this is the scientific explanation for the halophyte plants. A rendition of that we did yesterday, improvisation. And then, so I've been researching a little bit this idea of maybe is architecture of transport or moving things. So there's a really interesting practice by Philippe Ram, who basically makes this architecture which is only about atmosphere and different weather conditions, if some of you know the practice. And then I want to mention just one more, which is this researcher I met. I mentioned her the other day about greenhouses, called Eva Resetar, and she works with this idea of making membranes. So architecture without walls essentially, but just membranes that reacts to their environment and permeates. So exactly like halophyte does. It's just like a series of tubes and membranes that filter different elements, leave the salt out. So this idea of getting out of architecture, or decolonizing, or thinking of this idea of maybe new directions, I think in that sense, I'm not an architect, but I think looking at plants can give a lot of ideas. The practice of Eva Resetar is called archaic text, and it comes from textile, but nice work. Okay. So now, how am I doing this time? Okay. Just to explain, or like try to build a little bit around this model, we were trying to render this idea that, and this crazy idea, when you think about it, that the plant makes its own land. So, and it does that through basically gathering shells and minerals and different sort of elements which it starts its life underwater, and then it gathers it and creates soil, mud basically, and colonizes this mud, and then when the soil is sort of ready, this plant disappears and leaves space for other plants. So I thought this was quite a beautiful story. You can draw sorts of metaphors, from that if you want, about teaching, for example, or things like that. And so, yeah, that's one of the reasons we made the model. So the model is upside down. It's this idea of the sort of verticality, but underground of the plant. And super simple diagram, which I think is really amazing. Sand, silt, and clay is the three elements to make soil. So you should look at it like this, if you can. We're making different models now of soil, and then, there are many projects coming out of the courses we do, which come to this idea of designing soil. I wonder why, but so I'm just going to show one, which is about using, sorry, I'm jumping to school projects, I hope that's okay, just stop me. But this is a project by a student called Sigrun Thorlacius. She decided to study mushrooms and how they could essentially break down heavy metals in a particular area in Iceland, where there's been a lot of cars buried for many decades. So Iceland has a lot of landfills, and this was a sort of wetland area, and they sort of dried it and buried a lot of industrial waste there. And this is another part of the project where she decided to try it out and infect some mortar from the Renault Megane, I think, with the mushrooms. And this is still decomposing in Iceland. It's in the zoo. It's really cool because she works in the zoo, so it's one of the exhibits in the zoo in Reykjavik. Okay. How are we doing? Carry on a little bit? Yeah? Okay. So, when I was researching the plant, I just suddenly realized I couldn't find so much. We were looking at Samphire originally, that was the first name I had. And then I found a document which I've then lost, so I can't tell you where it comes from, also where this drawing is from. These are all the way this plant is called in different cultures, and somebody's looking into the Lithuanian. Nicola, but I don't know if you found it. But what I found really interesting is I've sort of clustered them into different parts. So, and they're all related to somehow the use, of the plant. So the first time it was quoted was alkali, actually, which you can understand by the root. It's related to the salt. And then from this Salicornia, Spanish sal sola soda, salthorn would be the Icelandic translation, because I'm growing it in Iceland, so I have to find a cool name. And then there's a whole cluster about the glass, capacity of making glass, the mother of glass. It's quite beautiful. Hi, this is the mother of glass, quite nice. And then, there's one which is the samphire, which is the most common name, or sampiere in Italian, comes from this idea that it's St. Peter's herb, and which is related to this coastal intertidal place where it grows. It's the protector of sailors. When you come to the coast, you see St. Peter's herb and you're back home, basically. And then the food area, sea bean, sea asparagus, and pickleweeds. I also like this. If you look, you can spend ages talking about this. Like is it cooler to be a sea bean or a sea asparagus? Like sea bean was at the time where this was like, they started to grow it, and they thought it would be like a mass food, specifically because you can pickle it, for example. And then there was a report I'm talking about France now, I think it was in the 18th century, by an authority in sort of culinary topics, who just decided that this was a useless plant, and then it was basically forgotten for a century, and now it's coming back in fashion, but they call it sea asparagus because maybe it's a bit more, yeah. So yeah, just the use. I'm just going very quick. This is a really funny slide. This is how. So it used to make soap in Aleppo in Syria, and this is the way they cut it. So I don't know if anyone's seen that before, but I mentioned it to you, so I put it in there because it's going to be a soap making workshop. So you just flood the floor, and then you have like so you make a mix with Salicornia, burnt Salicornia, and sort of olive oil generally. And then you flood this floor, and then there's this person is on skates with like blades underneath, and then the people pull him like throughout the whole soap floor. Yeah, insane. So and you can see these people coming to watch, like soap cutting.
Crazy things I've heard.
And then and the funny thing, you mentioned yesterday, right, saying that now it's a huge thing on. I'm digressing totally on YouTube to look at soap cutting videos.
Yes.
So if you just Google soap cutting videos, I spent like a good hour yesterday. Okay, anyway. So but burning it, eating it, making glass, and then the last little picture is because I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, yes, it's a potential companion for us when we move to other planets because of its capacity to grow in very harsh conditions, and also it grows several times, and so they are studying along with another plant called Azolla, this idea of maybe taking it to space. I don't have any more information on this. My Swedish friend told me about it, so I just thought I had to put it in there. And hybridity, which is a notion we've been discussing, and I think for plants there's a super nice history about half plants, half animal, half plants, half rocks, folklore. This is one of my favorite images. It's called the vegetable lamb. Do you know this one? Oh, it's a great story. But next time I will talk about it. And, in this folklore of plants, there are more examples, and it's fascinating because basically, samphire, Salicornia, it's always like it's a horn of salt. It's like it's a plant and it's a mineral. So, I think there are species which are basically have this sort of strange aura of being hybrids, neither nor things. So I just we have some. So we talk about this stuff with our students, and then this is a project by one of our students who's looking at the idea of synthesizing our own energy from the sun, basically doing photosynthesis. Evelyn Sonia Punter, she's now at the RCA, so that's great. And it's called Semi-Orthotropic Mankind. So she researched why do we need to produce food if we can just synthesize our own energy, and she looked into the biology of it and found out that there is a slug that can do it, so we can do it too. This is a skin being modified with genetically modified to be able to do that. And this sounds totally crazy, but at the same time, I'm just giving you two examples of very different cultural manifestation of these ideas. One is again from the Michael Marder book, where he talks about why, for example, we're trying to understand the photosynthesis, and how we can use it to produce fuel in that case, but energy in general. And then I went to Madeira for a conference a few months ago, and there's a huge thing about sun gazing. Is anyone into that here? Okay, so apparently you can, live without food if you know how to sun gaze. So if you have to train yourself, because of course you would burn your eyes, but and it's not only it's not through the eyes actually. It's like transdermal, nutrition, and it's not only the sun, but if you go into mud, which is very nutritious, then you can also get we get a lot of stuff for our feet basically. So this idea of sun gazing, it was really funny because it was a very few months after this project, and and it's coming. But we'll have to, come on. If we really think that plants, have an agency, and we're not going to start to, continue eating them. That's going to be a huge problem. I mean, we have to think about this. So this is a photo from Retna, who's the folklorist who did the drawings. And just for the anecdote, she did a project for her final project, which was called Baura Miri, which means just a marsh, just a swamp in Iceland. And which was basically costume to go to have mud bath in the swamps in Iceland, because this was a traditional health activity in Iceland until they decided to drain them all to make more agriculture, but there are still some marshes. So her final project was basically to do that, and it's one of the reasons I asked her to do the illustrations. Okay, conclusion remarks. In my subtitle I said hallucinatory ecology, and I'm not sure what I meant, but I want to try to define it. So I guess there are several ideas in there. The idea of hallucinating is that perceiving something that's not there. That's the basic definition. And I'm just basically working, as you were mentioning yesterday, the idea that the images are sometimes, obstructing the understanding, or maybe, too many images. And in the case of plants particularly, because that's what I'm busy with, I think that we have to find new language to basically represent them. So maybe models, or maybe other ways, because I think we've been showered with, we've been greenwashed with images by including by ecologists, and I think there may be other ways. This is in Iceland. This is where there was a lupina plant, which is also an invasive species. So I don't know, we're just removing the image is the question you were dealing with yesterday. And then there's the question of movement, which I haven't tackled at all in this project, but this idea that plants move or don't move, I think there's a nice reflection on that in the Michael Mather text, and it's ends up with this huge invitation to artists and designers to try to tackle this movement. But this is a nice quote, that there is an asynchrony between our gaze, the human gaze, and the movement of plants. So it's not that they don't move, it's just we don't perceive it. And the question is, how can we bridge this gap through some media or even understanding? And in that sphere I want to point towards the work of this Percy Smith, who's just been re-edited. He made a film called Minute Bodies, which is all about filming growth and decay. And very quickly, but then we're going to have an amazing talk about data after the break. With the invasive research, one question we're looking at is looking at traditional representation of invasive plants, and also trying to find new ways to in a way to criticize this term of invasive or not invasive or native in the sort of framework of changing ecosystems. And one way we're trying to do is by using data about the plants rather than images, and to create some algorithms to map out the invasive issue. Okay, so thank you very much. That was just
thanks so much. This was really great. I have a lot of questions, but there's one which has been hovering in my mind, and I think it has been coming up in so many talks, and now I'm like, okay, we have to talk about this. So I was really fascinated by this image of the hybrid that you showed us.
This guy.
Right, yeah. And I wonder, where did you take it from? Can you say something more about it? But more in general, one of the questions, because we have talked about getting out of the Anthropocene, and whether talking about, I had this question, whether talking about the Anthropocene, particularly considering what you've been showing, right? So plants make their own soil. Mm-hmm. It's not just the Salicornia, but every plant. Mm-hmm. What they do, they transform the environment, the living. That's what plants are. In a way, we can say they're the perfect amphibian creature, because part of their life is hidden in the soil and part is outside, so they literally transform all the elements into one another. So they need water, but then there's the oxygen production. So in this sense, they go full cycle. But so in this sense, there's a way in which if we take really plants seriously, I don't know, the whole idea of the Anthropocene seems to me kind of exaggerated in the sense that it's okay, we humans, we are the only one who have been able to do this, right?
I mean, totally. I mean, especially if you look at invasive species. I mean, we're not going to be, you know, it's not going to be the Anthropocene for very long because, I mean, this, you know, we have no idea how it's going to evolve, you know.
No, for me, I have a little bit this suspicion that, you know, the Anthropocene is this kind of, that's always the last resort when you're put and say, okay, you're not alone on this planet. Then it's like, but we are the only one who can destroy it. Like, we're the only one who can harm the planet. And I think, you know, if one takes plants seriously, we can see that these other plants are always nice and cozy and you put it in your balcony.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's also, this idea of hallucinatory is maybe what I'm pointing at. I mean, it also relates to somebody, I think she's called Vinciane Despret. She's like a philosopher of like more like animal studies, but she basically she says that we are greatly underestimating other species, like this idea of underestimating, and you know, no matter how much we know so far, there's still so much we have to learn.
Right. Okay. So maybe then you have an answer to this question. No, which is so. What is the difference between plants and animals? Because I mean, the very idea of a hybrid and what this shows that there's a difference between the two, right? And that, you know, the animal on top is also representing lifeless. Like the very idea of the hierarchy, vegetative life, animal life, human life, is the Aristotelian distinction between what is merely vegetative and what as a soul, but in the form of the animal, so the sensitive soul, and then you have the humans who have words, right? And,
I mean,
logos.
I think.
But I wonder whether, you know, we talked about the first 2 layers. I wonder whether you can say as something about the lower layers of the difference between plants and animals. Okay, I'll shut up.
No, cool, great, thanks. I'm really happy to talk about. Let's just start with this one. So this is called the vegetable lamb. It's like it's a myth which exists in many different cultures. This is for me the nicest rendition of it. There are also like some fake artifacts. So basically, okay, I'll tell you quickly the story. Some people, travelers, you know, were mentioning that they had been to India and had seen this great beast animal which was half plant, half animal. And you know, stories traveling, people started to illustrate these stories and created this mythology of the vegetable man. And there's a writer who's retraced the story, and I mean, I want to leave it open to interpretation. So I quite like this image. I won't tell you what the conclusion of this retracing of the history was, but I like this image because precisely it sort of opens this debate of the links between the two. And one thing which is interesting in the mythology is that the idea would be that this animal would just eat like all the plants which are around the stem, and then when there's no more plants, he would die, or she, or it. So for me, it's also related to this idea of resources, you know, like locality and resources. And you know, once you've depleted all the things that made you grow, then you know you just disappear. So and then now when it comes to this idea of the difference, I think it's been tackled like in many different directions now. So the book I was mentioning, this at the beginning the senses, what a plant knows. Yeah, what a plant knows. This guy. That's really interesting in that sense that it just talks about how plants, react to different stimuli in one kind of senses they have and how it triggers movement. And so essentially, because I guess for me a more interesting question would be like, what kind of intelligence, can we find in other species, both animals and both. I think the animal intelligence has been greatly studied through, many recent critical work, but I think plants is coming now to the foreground, and so I mean I have no real answer to the question, but I'm super interested in it, and also the ethical aspect that this will.
You keep trigger. Raising the question together. I mean, you don't need an answer.
No.
May I tell you something as a botanist? Because recently scientists have made a lot of new research on plant communication. And
can you speak up?
I will vote for plant part because I'm a botanist.
Hey.
So recently scientists have made very new discoveries that plants communicate, and they even have feelings for smaller plants of their own species, and they feed them in the forest. Bigger plants feed their younger ones, so the next generation would grow for the next forest. Then they found that deciduous trees feed conifer trees in summertime, while otherwise it happens in wintertime. Conifers give some materials and some nutrients to those who have no leaves. Then another thing is very interesting is their internet during roots and fungi. They are sending signals about what's coming, about herbivores or some diseases or pests. They inform their neighbors, and others excrete some substances to be safe from the coming danger.
Yeah, so that's chemical ecology, right? Is the science of this relationship.
Plants communicate in three ways. One is chemical way, another is electromagnetic waves, and the third one is very new discovery. It's acoustic signals. Even there is a small film on YouTube as a seed grows of maize, I think, maize seed grows, and it sends trickling sound to another seed, so they know where the soil is and where the sun is. They are like communicating. Oh, I'm okay. I found where I grow very well. So you go down and grow too. So plants are like talking.
The first you said it's the chemical.
Electromagnetic.
So now it's been thought that plants are like talking to each other, but they are doing it very slowly, not in our time scale. So, and they are quite smart enough. And next step is now researches on fungi and their importance in those networks, because they are very important in those sending signals between trees and between smaller plants. So fungi are also smart. We think that we are also smart and having the same talking.
Can I ask a question to the bottoms?
Yeah, go for it. Much more interesting. Go for it.
I mean, just picking up on what you said, because there was a discussion among vegetarians and.
Yes, you are eating the same living thing as animals.
Yeah. So usually vegetarians like to respond that there are no emotions in plants, or you know.
They have no nerves, but they feel.
Yeah. And so the question is very precise. There was this kind of research that plants kind of expel a certain kind of a scream when they're attacked or when you want to pick up a flower. So they kind of they have this so-called screaming effect. So
Yes,
because some of research contradict them and say, okay, that's a bullshit. So what's your take on that?
So it's like I said, they are sending the signal for another neighbor that they have been eaten or attacked by some kind of pest. In order the other one could excrete safety compounds, so he could be safer. So, for protection.
I have one question for the.
It doesn't say that, oh, I'm hurt. It says, be careful.
Okay.
My question about you mentioned and talk lecturer as well mentioned plants, but you didn't speak about mushrooms. And my question is, are mushrooms plants? Because or it's are there some kind of racial relationships or racial negation between traditional plants and mushrooms? Do mushrooms hate plants?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Like who's going to take over? You mean plants or mushrooms? Yeah. Maybe we should. Jennifer is left, right?
Well, I can comment.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Come in.
Curators have a mushroom guy.
Well, okay, just to give you a little example, about 10 years ago, scientists, the foresters in Canada, in the northern part of Canada, in the forest plantations, where they're growing basically trees, for the timber, they saw the huge chunk of forest dying. It was like maybe 10 kilometers or 11 kilometers, so it was like really a huge thing, which they spotted from the plains, actually. So they saw like there was a big chunk, and they sent the researchers, to figure out what is happening, why suddenly in the middle of very sort of like healthy forest, there is a chunk of the forest dying, And they found that there was a mushroom. And first they thought that, it is a kind of species, there's a lot of these mushrooms, popping in. It took them some time to understand that it was one single mushroom. That it had very, very long mycelium sort of like roots or, arms, network. So it was one single species colonizing the 10 or 11 or 15 kilometers, and it's I don't know how many square kilometers, but it was like really huge chunk of the forest. It was completely colonized. So this mushroom was sucking all the energy from the trees, and the trees were completely dying out. And it was so the mushroom as a superior being. And we should not forget that the mushrooms came to this planet from other planets. So they were first colonizers on this planet. And then they came up with a large project of the soil. And in a way, all the other species is a result of the big mushroom plot. Right. So in a way, what we've been working... no, but what we've been working, also at MIT, we've been really studying whether the humans is part of that plot. Because from the perspective of the mushroom, we are just mobile substrates. So all our cosmic programs is actually to help mushrooms to travel from this planet to another planet.
Yeah.
So Richard Branson and also what's his name? SpaceX.
Oh, Elon Musk.
Elon Musk is actually a part of the mushroom plot.
So not only plants, but also humans.
Yeah.
Yes, but we just serves of that. But you know, that's the war between plants and mushrooms. It's very early.
I think for me it's a super interesting discussion, but one moment I'm really curious, I've really landed from a different world, obviously, and quite new and small discussion this time, but we're constantly talking about interspecies communication, but we constantly use vocabulary which is human application, to the relationship between species. Why we're discussing the relationship between plant and mushroom as hate and kind of love or conquering relationship? It's just an open question. I mean, this is something which maybe I will address also if I get the chance maybe tomorrow to talk, that we tend to do these projections and how we structure our world is through our projection on, and what architecture is a project and projection in a way. But I think that for me it's very interesting to hear these conversations. But I think somewhere in a way we can't really, abstract from being humans, this is what we are. But we always structure everything, with even wording that we use. The relationships we define is determined by the relationships we have to each other. Right? So it would be interesting to sort of.
There was this idea, actually, Nicola was talking about it yesterday, that to maybe make a sort of attempt, a glossary, or maybe invent to sort of try to, come up with new ways. Because I had the same question when Jennifer was presenting about the language and about because I think it's very important to find a new language.
Maybe it is colonization, maybe it's war, but maybe there is some other relationship. Maybe it's not just about the relationship of power, right? Or let's say, again, continuing the discussion before, it's not just war or peace, right? There might be, or unwar or unpeace, but there might be some others in between states. And would be interesting to also hear these comments.
I don't know.
It's good.
If it's a moment to comment, because it's a very big question.
Yes.
Right? And very important one. I think the most important and very difficult. I've been thinking about this for a while because, yes, language is a human thing. And basically, what we are doing here is constantly tackling the question of representation. And representation will be always ideological, and it will be always human. So in a way, even inventing new vocabularies is kind of, there have been a lot of attempts in the history of philosophy to invent new vocabularies. The whole history of philosophy is the invention of concepts, as Deleuze put it. So what you do, you basically propose new concepts. Some of them are really successful and efficient. Some of them, only philosophers remain fond of them. So basically, it's all artists. They circulate in certain circuits. But my question is here, basically, the question of post-human, what to do with representation. Because there is a constant dialectics of new kinds of representations. And I think you mentioned Edouard Combe. What strikes me in that book, How Far is Fame, is that he gets back to the question of a sign, and he says, no, representation is really important. Representation is what we need in order to kind of get into the dialogue with the forest. And even he uses semiotics of Pierce to do this. And this is the less convincing part.
But not necessarily verbal representation. He's saying not necessarily verbal, as in words.
But then I kind of agree that we need representations because we're humans. The question is how we kind of locate ourselves in front of representation, and how many perspective of representations do we take into account? So basically, that's a constant problem of all becoming a human. Is also, like addressing the problem.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think we're all having the same questions. I mean, at the moment, just to locate myself personally about this, as I was saying, I'm kind of looking into both media, like trying to tackle with new media for this time issue of like this gap, between the time of plants and our time, for example. So this is this Percy Smith, really beautiful stuff. This is called The Strangler. It's about these two plants, one of them. And so, the other thing is this folkloric knowledge, and I mean, it's difficult. It's like a bit of a swampy terrain, but this idea of, a lot of different times people were attempting to, being one with plants through ingesting and hallucinate, So I'm not pushing for that, but I'm just interested in thinking, how can we learn from this? Yeah. This. Just it's so beautiful and tragic. So there's a new. The singer of this band called the Tindersticks. He made a new cut of all the material, which was all like thousands of hours. This Percy Smith guy, he was just like doing his films, a bit of a recluse, And then I think the BBC or the BFIs are in London have the archive, and they asked this musician to make a cut and a narrative from all with some music. There's music on it. Yeah. Super nice. We should watch it. But he did it like a long time ago, so all the technology of filming is very DIY. So if you look at photos of the studio, he didn't have, like amazing equipment or anything. So, that's also quite nice. The type of technology we can use, not necessarily high technology, but so this is called animation, essentially. So trying to get to the movements. Can be also through probably like hours of pressing the button.